Philip Hammond was the first to conduct scientific excavation at Hebron over 3 summer seasons in 1964, 65, and 66, and this was when Hebron was inside the West Bank territory controlled by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Hammond, who was my doctoral chairman and just a very interesting, almost an Errol Flynn swashbuckling type of a personality in the 50s and 60s in Jordanian archaeology, was close friends with young King Hussein, and got just about whatever he wanted in those days. After the Six-Day War made it impossible for him to both excavate at Hebron under the auspices of the Israelis and keep his good graces with the Jordanians, Hebron was, that is to say, Hebron's excavations were curtailed, and Hammond went to another famous site in what was left of Jordan, Petra, and they excavated there for another 30 years, and that's really where he made his fame. But he started at Hebron and did, from all that I have been able to discover over the years, a fairly professional job. 20 years went by, and Avi Ofer, a young doctoral student at Tel Aviv University, dug with funding provided by the Israel Exploration Society in 1984, 1985, and 1986. Also did a very professional job, although some of his interpretations I would differ with. But his excavation, too, was curtailed. In 1987, the year following, we had what we refer to now as the First Intifada begin, which caused enough unrest in the West Bank, and particularly in Hebron, that they were unable, or at least thought themselves unable, to continue excavation at that hotly debated site. If they'd only known how bad the Second Intifada would have been, they'd have thought that the First Intifada was child play, and they'd have continued. But you can never know those things as you're not involved in knowing the future. So for many years, again, Hebron goes fallow archaeologically. And then in 1998, as I've listed on the handout here, our colleague Yuval Peleg, who is a fine archaeologist, fine young archaeologist, excavated a late Bronze Age tomb on the northwest slope of the Tel. He didn't do any work in the city, but there was this tomb that had to be excavated because the IDF wanted to build a small storage facility right there. And he excavated the LB tomb and found good evidence for the entirety of the late Bronze Age there, just outside the wall. You can see where his tomb is. If you look on the back of your handout, you will see the word tomb there, right at the top of the page, and that's where Peleg's tomb was located. However, I have listed for you the 1999 excavations of Emanuel Eisenberg of the Israel Antiquities Authority. In 1999, it was proposed to build a new apartment building there on the lower north slope of the Tel, where the street runs by, and it was necessary then to run an emergency excavation and to see what was underneath there. And Emanuel Eisenberg, in 2 different excavation seasons in 1999, did a remarkably professional job of using the latest excavation techniques to uncover a limited part of the lower north slope. Inside, however, the ancient wall line of the old city, as it turns out. And that's what's been done. I approach this subject from 2 particular points of view. Number one, I was, as I said, a graduate student of Phil Hammond, and he had allowed me to write my dissertation on Hebron. And long after I produced the dissertation, in 2003, since we had a year off from digging at Gath, I decided that I would use the time to pull together everything that had been discovered since, because my dissertation was only on the 1960s excavation, but pull together everything that had been done since. Avi Ofer had not done really any publishing of his limited digs at Hebron, and Emanuel Eisenberg was just in the process of getting some things out. He only had 1 article in Hadashot. So I visited with them, particularly Eisenberg was wonderfully gracious. I spent 2 very long days with him at the offices of the Israel Antiquities Authority, literally holding and handling every jar, every jug, every lamp, every scarab that he dug out of the small area on the north slope. Ofer was very kind to me in allowing me to see his material. Yuval Peleg was very kind to me. And, of course, I'd always had access to Hammond's material. What I decided to do was pull it together And in this, particularly Eisenberg was very friendly because he thought that it all had to be coordinated anyway. And since his stuff was part of the public record, he said, you're the one to do this, coordinate it with what Hammond and Ophir did. And so we came up with the notion of the AEH review, which was really a review of Hammond's material, but a review of Hammond's material to correlate it with all of the later excavations. And this involved not only looking over his plans and all of his photos and all of the finds which still remain that aren't in basements somewhere in Amman, but also, again, revisiting the site in troubled times to see what had changed there. Now, I got ahead of myself. This is me 20 years ago and 40 pounds ago as well. Stan, this is what my wife calls the Nelson Gluck photo. And you would only, if you know about Nelson Gluck's work in the desert and wearing a keffiyeh and looking dashing, you would maybe get that. I was thinner in the old days. But I spent a good deal of time with her and by myself and with whatever friend I could get that would dare go with me to Hebron back in the 1980s and even in the early and mid-90s, exploring every part of the tell, looking for what was left of Hammond's squares, what was left of Ophir's squares. And most of this was done, of course, before Eisenberg dug, going around the tell with my old Fujica camera and the tape measure in hand, and being warmly received, thankfully, by not only the Israeli settlers that have a presence at Tel Rumeida, but by the Arab families that live on the tell. And everybody, at least as far as I could tell, was very gracious, and I'm grateful to them. But there you can see Der Arba'in behind me, there in a shot taken by my wife, and I just always would have a chill go through my bones when I considered who had lived here, who had lived in this elite zone. King David, Abraham had a presence in this town, at least according to our Bible. Well, that last shot was taken from the perspective of the arrow there, and having researched the site and written my dissertation, I left it and then, of course, came back to the review in the just 3 years ago. All of the plans that I'll show you here for the next 20 minutes or so come from a diagram that we made, not the traditional type of a map that you see of a site which has elevation lines, but what we did was we constructed a map of the terrace lines, which for our purposes was much more useful. And in all of the pictures that you'll see, the terrace lines are present, and Der Arba'in, which is what the arrow is pointing to there from the perspective of the last photo, is what we relate everything to, because it would have been the elite zone. Here is the plan of excavations over the many years then at Hebron, and you have a similar plan, except with projected wall lines on it on the back of your handout there. The arrow in the middle again shows the perspective of the Nelson Gluck shot, and the areas in orange were the areas excavated by Hammond. The areas in green, the areas excavated by Avi Ofer in the 1980s, and the areas in blue were both the tomb by Peleg, which I have labeled P on this one, and the limited but large area that Eisenberg excavated in 1999. You'll notice that quite a bit of the outer periphery of the tell has been explored, but not much of the interior of the tell. And this had to do with the farmhouses that were located there, with olive gardens that people didn't want dug up, with military presence. The lower